Chapter 6. The basement archives of Atlanta City Hall smelled like dust, forgotten paperwork, and neglected ambition. The scent permeated everything: the boxes, the shelves, even the air itself, which hung stagnant and undisturbed as if the ventilation system had given up years ago. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, several flickering in their death throes, casting uneven illumination over the cramped space. The sound was a constant, irritating drone that seemed to burrow into Isabella's temples, promising a headache by day's end. Metal shelving stretched in every direction, loaded with bankers' boxes, ancient ledgers, and disintegrating file folders. The physical memory of a city that preferred to forget its uglier histories. Isabella's pantsuit was collecting dust by the minute, but she didn't care. She sneezed softly, rubbing her nose with the back of her hand. The sound echoed slightly in the cavernous space, disturbing the sepulchral quiet. After meeting McKeel yesterday evening, she needed concrete facts, something solid to grasp, to make sense of her conflicting instincts about him. She had walked away from the hotel, with her heart hammering and her skin flushed, angry at herself for her response to him. The memory made her press her lips together as she flipped through another folder of land records from the 1950s. Her fingers leaving smudges on the fragile, yellowing paper. The documents smelled of age and chemical preservation. A musty, acrid combination that caught in the back of her throat. "Damn it," she muttered, finding yet another property transfer between Volkov Holdings and Aldrich Enterprises. The paper crackled dryly between her fingers, fragile with age. This one was dated 1953, following 3 unsolved murders in what was then called Piedmont Recreation Grounds. She pushed a strand of hair behind her ear, leaving a dusty streak across her cheekbone. The grit felt rough against her skin. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Every 15 years, give or take, murders occurred. Property changed hands, and the same family names appeared on the transfers. Her fingernails tapped against the metal surface of the table, creating a soft rhythm that helped her think. "Are you finding everything you need, honey?" The elderly clerk appeared at the end of the row, her beehive hairdo adding 6 inches to her already impressive height. The woman's sudden presence made the metal shelving seem to close in, and the narrow aisle became more confined. The archivist wore a cardigan despite the basement's stuffy warmth. Her arthritic fingers were adorned with several costume jewelry rings that clicked against the metal shelving as she steadied herself. The sound echoed in the quiet space, sharp and intrusive. Isabella startled, nearly dropping the folder. The loose pages slipped, and she scrambled to prevent them from cascading onto the dusty floor. She wasn't easily surprised. A survival skill in courtrooms and crime scenes. But she hadn't heard the woman's approach. The threadbare carpet runner between the shelving units shouldn't have muffled footsteps. But there had been nothing, not even the rustle of clothing. "Yes, thank you, Mrs. Gladwell." Isabella forced a smile. "These historical property records are exactly what I was looking for." Mrs. Gladwell peered at her over her reading glasses, the chain dangling against her wrinkled neck. The glasses caught the fluorescent light, momentarily obscuring her eyes with reflected glare. "Most unusual request I've had in some time. A young lady like you interested in old property transfers around the Piedmont Park area. You with one of those historical preservation committees?" "Something like that," Isabella murmured, scanning a deed transfer. The faded typeface was difficult to read in the uneven lighting, and certain letters almost disappeared with age. She had long ago perfected the art of appearing engaged while only half listening. I'm just curious about ownership patterns. Mrs. Gladwell didn't sound convinced. She shuffled closer. If you're looking at Piedmont Park area history, you might want the Special Collections cabinet. Isabella looked up. Special collections? Materials that don't quite fit the regular filing system. Mrs. Gladwell winked conspiratorially, the motion exaggerated by her thick glasses. Unusual incidents, private donations, materials of a sensitive nature. That sounds perfect, Isabella said too quickly. I bet it does. Mrs. Gladwell's smile didn't reach her eyes, which remained watchful behind the thick lenses. Not many people know about that collection. Usually takes a special kind of researcher even to ask. Isabella kept her expression neutral. The mask she wore when defense attorneys presented surprise witnesses. I try to be thorough. A bead of sweat trickled down her back, and the basement's poor ventilation made the air close and stifling despite the overall dampness. Yes, I imagine so. Mrs. Gladwell studied her for a long moment, then nodded as if coming to a decision. Follow me, dear. She led Isabella deeper into the archive labyrinth, past rows of city council minutes and tax assessments, squeaking her shoes, creating an erratic rhythm against the linoleum floor. The further they went, the cooler and damper the air became, as if they were descending deeper underground, though the floor remained level. Isabella's skin prickled with the temperature change, goosebumps rising along her arms. They reached a section where the fluorescence had given up entirely. Only small desk lamps provided pools of yellow illumination that made the surrounding darkness seem deeper by contrast. The shadows between them seemed deeper, stretching like pools of ink. Even the smell changed, becoming mustier, with an underlying scent reminiscent of old pennies, metallic and vaguely unpleasant. Here we are. Mrs. Gladwell produced an ancient key ring and unlocked a metal cabinet that looked older than the building itself. The cabinet's hinges protested with a long-pained creak. These go back to the 1880s. Everything about Piedmont Park that didn't make the official records. Isabella frowned. She immediately recognized the implications. Unofficial records meant unofficial actions, possibly illegal ones. Why keep separate records? Her voice sounded too loud in the confined space, despite her attempt to speak softly. Mrs. Gladwell's smile turned knowing, her dentures slightly too perfect against her aged face. Every city has its secrets, dear. Atlanta is more than most. Some things aren't meant for the general ledger. She patted Isabella's arm, her touch dry and surprisingly cold, the contact brief but startling against Isabella's skin. Take your time. Just lock up when you're done and bring me the key. As the older woman shuffled away, Isabella turned to the cabinet with growing unease. The top drawer contained slim folders of newspaper clippings, personal letters and photographs, organized by decade. The smell of old paper was more pungent here, mixed with something else, a faint whiff of chemicals, perhaps from the photographic preservation process. She started with the most recent and worked backwards, her practiced eyes scanning for patterns, irregularities, connections. The small desk lamp cast a yellow pool of barely adequate light, forcing her to squint at the smaller text. The darkness beyond the circle of illumination seemed to press closer, as if curious about her discoveries. 3 hours later, Isabella's back ached from hunching over the tiny desk lamp. The pain a dull throb at the base of her spine, but her mind raced with connections. She rotated her shoulders, wincing at the stiffness, a physical reminder of how long she'd been lost in this rabbit hole of information. The metal folding chair had long since become an instrument of torture. The thin cushion compressed to uselessness beneath her. The pattern was unmistakable once she had enough data points. Approximately every 15 years for over a century, clusters of mysterious deaths occurred in or near Piedmont Park. Bodies drained of blood, unusual markings on the victims. Witnesses described shadowy figures with animal-like movement. After each cluster, property changed hands. The same parcels of land cycled between a handful of family names. Names that still appeared on Atlanta's society pages, like Volkov and Aldrich. "Jesus," Isabella whispered, pinching the bridge of her nose. The soft exclamation sounded louder than intended in the dense silence. She rarely cursed, even mentally, but the magnitude of what she was uncovering warranted it. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notepad app. The screen's blue glow was a harsh contrast to the warm yellow of the desk lamp, casting strange shadows across the documents. She recorded the pattern of land transfers following each death cluster. Her fingertips slid across the smooth glass screen, the sensation a stark contrast to the rough texture of the ancient papers she'd been handling. She automatically organized the information chronologically, establishing the timeline that would be presented to a jury as if this were a typical case. The correlation was statistically impossible to dismiss. Each time killings occurred, property shifted primarily between the Volkov and Aldrich families, with occasional transfers to other names that appeared repeatedly: Volkov, Petrov, Lamarche. Was she looking at some form of multi-generational territorial disputes? Another folder contained police reports, unofficial copies, not meant for public record, detailing witness statements that had been omitted from the official investigations. Despite their age, the typewritten pages were crisp against her fingers, as if preserved in this airless environment. Descriptions of impossibly fast attackers, red eyes, and animal-like growls. Reports were quietly buried, and witnesses later recanted or mysteriously relocated. The language was clinical, detached, but couldn't entirely mask the horror beneath the bureaucratic phrasing. She found a statement from 1965 that made her blood run cold. The thing weren't human. Moved too fast like a blur. Had these eyes that glowed red in the dark. When it grabbed Tommy, it dragged him 20 feet, like he weighed nothing. I heard bones breaking. Then God help me, it tore his throat out with its teeth. But not like an animal exactly. It stood up like a man after. I saw it looking at me, deciding to come after me next. The statement was marked witness intoxicated and not credible. The official report listed the cause of death as animal attack, possibly large dog. Isabella's hands were steady as she turned pages, but a chill had settled deep in her bones. The methodical part of her mind, which had carried her through autopsies and crime scene photos without flinching, catalogued each detail while another part recoiled at the implications. The desk lamp flickered momentarily, the shadows in the room seeming to shift and deepen before the light stabilized again. In a folder from the 1990s, she found a stack of photographs from a charity event. The glossy finish was still intact. She flipped through them idly at first, then stopped, her breath catching. Isabella recognized her immediately. Sarah Duncan, the first victim found in Piedmont Park 3 weeks ago. The photograph was dated 1995, nearly 3 decades earlier, but the face was unmistakable. It was their first victim. And beside her stood a young man who looked exactly like Mikhail Volkov. Not a relative, not a resemblance, but Mikhail himself, unchanged in 27 years. He had the same aristocratic features, enigmatic half-smile, and grey-blue eyes that caught the camera flash unnaturally. "Impossible," Isabella whispered. She examined the photograph more closely. Sarah was a teenager in the photo. She had been 43 when murdered last month, matching her age from the 1995 photo. Isabella pulled out her phone and compared this image to recent photos of Mikhail from society pages. Same face, same bearing, even a similar hairstyle. Not a hint of aging in nearly 3 decades. Mikhail looked the same age then as he did now. The photo caption noted that Sarah Duncan had been awarded a Volkov Foundation scholarship for displaced youth. Not only had she been at the hospital wing opening, but Sarah was a woman he had helped years ago. Isabella felt the pieces clicking together, her prosecutor's satisfaction of evidence aligning, mingling with a more profound, more personal dread. Isabella flipped through more photographs, finding Mikhail in images dating back to the 1980s, always looking the same. He was always present at charity events, civic ceremonies, and galas. He was consistently in Atlanta's upper echelon, watching decades pass without leaving their mark on him. She turned to the 1970s folder next, but as she reached for it, a new thought struck her with such force that her hand froze mid-air. The realization sent a cold wave through her body, raising goosebumps along her arms. If the cycle repeated every 15 years, and her mother had been killed 30 years ago with similar distinctive marks. Isabella's breathing quickened. The controlled rhythm she maintained even during the most stressful court proceedings fracturing. She pressed her palm against her sternum, feeling her heart pounding beneath her tailored blazer. The fabric felt suddenly constricting, too tight across her chest. She pulled out her phone again, fingers fumbling as she searched for photos from the year of her mother's death. The screen's blue light made her skin look bloodless, spectral in the otherwise amber-lit alcove. She found a society page from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution featuring a ribbon-cutting ceremony at a new veterans hospital. And there he was, Mikhail Volkov, standing with city officials, looking exactly as he did now. The same man who had almost touched her face yesterday had existed, unchanged, when she was only a child. The implications made her head swim, reality shifting beneath her like unstable ground. "Finding what you need?" Mrs. Gladwell's voice made Isabella jump. The elderly woman stood at the end of the row smiling pleasantly, her silhouette haloed by the distant fluorescence behind her. She'd appeared as silently as before, materializing from the shadows between the desk lamps. Not a single footstep or rustle of clothing had announced her approach. "Yes, thank you." Isabella slipped the photograph into her pocket without thinking, her instinct to secure evidence overriding her usual ethics. She felt the stiff paper slide against the silk lining of her jacket. These records have been invaluable. Wonderful. Mrs. Gladwell's smile remained fixed, her lipstick bleeding into the fine lines around her mouth. The red seemed too vivid in the dim light, almost as if freshly applied. "May I ask what specifically you found interesting?" Something in the woman's tone raised the fine hairs on Isabella's arms. The cadence was just slightly off, too measured, too deliberate. "Just some historical ownership patterns," she said carefully. "For a presentation I'm preparing." "I see." Mrs. Gladwell nodded. "And the Volkov materials? Did those assist your presentation?" The question hung in the air like a tangible thing, probing, weighted with unspoken significance. Isabella stiffened. She hadn't mentioned Volkov specifically to the clerk. Was someone monitoring her research? "They were informative," she said neutrally. "Thank you for your help. I should be going." She gathered her notepad and pen and slid them into her bag with measured movements. "Of course." Mrs. Gladwell stepped aside to let Isabella pass. The narrow aisle between shelving units felt suddenly claustrophobic. It was barely wide enough for Isabella to pass without brushing against the metal shelves or the older woman. "Do come back if you need anything else, Mrs. Santos. We're always happy to assist the district attorney's office." Isabella managed a tight smile and walked briskly toward the exit, skin prickling with the sense of being watched. The feeling was visceral. A pressure between her shoulder blades where she imagined Mrs. Gladwell's gaze fixed. She hadn't introduced herself by name either. The elevator seemed to take forever, and Isabella repeatedly pressed the button as if that would make it arrive faster. The button's plastic surface was worn smooth from countless fingers, cool beneath her touch. The harsh fluorescent lighting in this section made her feel exposed and vulnerable, and the emptiness of the corridor suddenly menacing rather than merely institutional. When it finally appeared, the doors sliding open with a ponderous groan of aged machinery, she stepped inside and sagged against the wall, exhaling heavily. Only in the safe confines of the elevator did she allow herself to recognize the hammering of her heart, the slight tremor in her hands. The mirrored interior reflected her from multiple angles, showing a woman whose composed exterior had begun to fray at the edges. As the elevator doors closed, taking her back to the main floor, Isabella exhaled shakily. The photograph burned in her pocket like a live coal, the edge pressing against her ribs with each breath. Outside, the afternoon sun momentarily blinded her after hours in the dimly lit basement. The brightness was almost painful, casting everything in vivid detail after the murky shadows below. She blinked rapidly, orienting herself on the steps of City Hall. The usual bustle of downtown Atlanta. Traffic, pedestrians, food vendors, seemed surreal after her immersion in decades of hidden violence. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The device vibrated against her hip, the sensation jarring against her already frayed nerves. The screen glowed brightly in the shadow of the overhang where she stood. "I know what Volkov is. Meet me at Coleridge Yard tomorrow at midnight. Come alone, or I won't show up." She stared at the message, her pulse quickening. The sender's number was blocked, and the message was untraceable. It could be a trap. It was probably a trap. Coleridge Yard was an abandoned industrial complex in a precisely isolated location that a killer would choose. The vast, dilapidated site was a maze of crumbling buildings and rusting equipment, popular with urban explorers but dangerous even in daylight. Every instinct honed through years in law enforcement screamed warning. But if there was even a chance this person had information about Volkov,